Hey everyone! If you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's mikeyOPP.com. Thanks! Hi, I'm Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week, coming to us from Portland, Oregon, is Mr. Jhasen Cooper. Hi, Jhasen. How's it going?
Medium plus. So pretty good. Pretty good. It only ever gets to awesome minus on my scale. So medium plus is not too bad.
Okay, awesome. And we're going to definitely ask you about your scale and what that highest level would be. But before we get to that, our standard question for all guests to provide somewhat of an anchor of familiarity is I ask, how old are you? Where did you grow up? And what generation do you consider yourself a member of, if any?
Okay, well, I will turn 50 in December, in the last 3 days of December, right before the turn of the year. So, like that's coming up, and that's a big signpost. Let's see, where did I grow up? I grew up in a combination of places: Holland, Michigan, Lewiston, Idaho, and yeah. So it was a combination of those two. And actually, I worked in a nonprofit for a while and went to a conference which kind of told me which generation I'm in, to try and promote different generations working together in like a nonprofit scenario. Boomers with millennials and things like that. And I found out that I am Generation Joneses. We were the first generation raised by television. We are particularly susceptible to advertising, which begrudgingly I find true. And we have like the work ethic of the greatest generation with the ennui that would be inherited by Generation X. So, we did a good job, but we knew we knew what was happening.
That kind of like really well segues into how you feel today and how it's a medium whatever. I think you said medium minus or medium plus today?
Medium plus today. Something fun that I do, because people ask you, how are you doing constantly when you go to the grocery store or the gas station or, wherever you have a transactional thing, how are you doing? And I just thought about defining my terms and creating a scale that made sense to me, and just put it out there, awesome plus. And people usually laugh. You would imagine that a scale of awesome plus to shitty minus would be the reach of the scale, but I only go from shitty minus to awesome minus maybe in moments. It doesn't quite get all the way up there like it used to.
Well, that's two questions now that I want to ask you about this just alone. But what I wanted to say is your answer for why you say it is also why I wanted to interview, which is you're an instantly familiar and funny person. And I'm saying this from having only emailed with you, but you just have a way of being witty and concise in your emailing, at least, which has already translated into your conversational tone. So I'm curious. Well, first of all, I know you currently live in Portland, which is a place where I think a lot of just one bar above misanthropic personalities tend to congregate. I lived there for 5 years.
That's funny that you would use the term misanthrope or misanthropic, because I considered myself a misanthrope when I was in my home state of Michigan and had intended to move west. And when I fell in love with 2002 Portland, it turned, in Michigan, I wanted everybody but about 6 people dead, just because, horrible biomass waste of, I was just about everybody. And then I came to Portland, and before this time period you're talking about, when they were definitely coming, I came there and I ended up being like restoring my belief in people. And so, like, instead of wanting everybody but 6 people dead, I only wanted like specific people to meet with misfortune instead of, and it was a big shift for me. It was hard because I'd go to cross the street and cars would slow down to allow me to do this, and I would get annoyed because where I'm from, we take care of ourselves. We wait until you're gone with your car and then we cross the street safely. So now you've created like this weird instance where, okay, do I believe that the other guy coming is going to stop too? If I start crossing the road here, and I was just waving people by angrily, but it was something cute about the city that I loved.
Yeah. What I'm curious about, because you're reflecting about who you were and who you've become and who you are, how much of your disposition, whether or not you're a misanthrope or not, has to do with where you live versus you? Like, would you have achieved a same sense of peace had you stayed in Michigan and just cultivated a different attitude? Or do you think the environment really affects us this much?
I think moving far away from where you grew up is a very significant, worthwhile thing for you to do in developing who you are. Because when you stay at home and you never leave, you're held into that framework that people that have known you that long have you in. And leaving and going somewhere else gives you the ability, if you use it, to completely restructure who you are, what your attitude is, and how you go about things. So that, I don't know, it's reinvention. Maybe it sounds sinister, but it's not. It's just like, these people don't know me. I get to be a different person to them than what everybody knows me as.
I moved clear across the country and alone 4 times in my life, and all 4 times it had a great immediate effect. I think similar to what you're describing. I never was able to answer the following, but I'm going to pitch it to you. So, is your identity equally constructed by others and yourself, or is the one for yourself going to outweigh the one from others?
I feel like, hmm, that's a good question. I feel like being around wonderful people, um, soaks into your clothes, gets into your skin, and helps because, like children growing up, your idea of a romance and a relationship, how it's supposed to be, it comes from your parents, or the negative is demonstrated by your parents, depending on how your cards came out. But that having that around you helped you identify your idea of love, before you went out and started whittling that down for yourself. And I think being a good person, like, you might want sit there in your misanthropy and like be like, I'd like to be a better person, really, if all these assholes were around. But like, when you're surrounded by interesting people who just clear space for you to be whoever you are, and you learn how to do that from them. You, it's by demonstration, by just vibrational tone, like all the way through the wavelengths.
Wow. God, there's so many good questions to ask. I have so many good questions I want to ask you, but I feel like we've jumped over the premise of the entire podcast. So I think now would actually be an important time to ask you the question about life and death, so that then we can backtrack and get into it all. So I have a feeling everything we've asked you about is absolutely going to tie into it. But what do you actually think happens to you when you die? And I ask you this on, as you suggested, the best day ever to record this. It's Day of the Dead, everyone. And I want to give you credit, Jhasen, because you're the one who suggested it, and I love that. So it's Day of the Dead. You're turning 50. What the hell happens to you when you die?
My last 5 or 6 years have been medically complicated to the point where I'm pretty much broken. And all it's going to take is the expansion of some tissue to cut off the blood supply to my brain. So at 50, I'm kind of, looking at a 75, 80-year-old's perspective of things. I've been medically advanced in age physically. I'm an old man way earlier than I should have been. I've always been hale and hearty. I've had this thing that's wrong with me, and that's the only thing that's been wrong with me throughout my life. And it just knocked the legs out from under me. And this is where I am. Portland and I actually broke up. I am out in eastern Washington in a small town, and just kind of living my best life until death. And one of the reasons I left Portland ties into what I know is going to happen when I die, or am confident will happen because I cast a spell about it. So my cat Penelope was murdered by a person on January 31st of this year. I searched for her all night. She was an indoor-outdoor cat. I searched for her all night. I knew something was wrong. She wasn't just a cat. She was a bonded familiar, and I lost hit points, so I knew something was wrong. It's for you D&D crowd out there. But, when I found her, she was destroyed in a way that an animal wouldn't, other than the kind that, drives cars and uses tools. And that just almost killed me, but I, without going into all of that.
Well, you can get into it as much as you want. I mean, we are here to explore death and then how it affects the way you live your life and morality, and we entertain every thought and every position. We are open-minded to the extreme. So, yeah, whatever you think is important. But I think to update where I'm at in this interview with you, just so you can track where I'm tracking, you are profoundly interesting because you have a lot of different perspectives, and amidst all of what we were talking about with like wit and clever and everything, you have a very severe condition that what I wanted to ask you for clarification on is it may kill you today, tomorrow, but it also may not kill you for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, is this a really open condition?
Well, that seems to be what's happening. Instead of choking that off and killing me, it's pushing through my head out my right eye. My right eye is damaged. It's paralyzed from the center line over as of just last year. It's always been attacking my eyes because that's where it lives in my head. And it crushed a nerve that controls the movement of my eye, and now it doesn't do that right anymore. So, yeah, I'm just, I've got a divot in my head with a titanium plate. I've got a screwy eye now, and every day hurts a lot. But so instead of choking me off, it's just going to make it worse and worse and worse until question mark. So, but anyway, I cast a spell to come back to my neighborhood where my cat's buried. And as a ghost, I'm just going to look around and see if she's playing around there. And I might just sit there and smoke ghost cigarettes for 100 years to catch a sight of her, like in the bushes or up in the big tree. But if she's, if we're still bonded, familiars, I should know right where she is. But that's my guess, because that's where these wonderful neighbors offered to lay her to rest, because I lived in an apartment. I didn't want to dig into apartment ground and leave her there, but I didn't have the right. And anyway, they graciously offered the they have a historic home, and they offered the front corner of their yard. So yeah, I hope to step through that ivy arch right by her grave and see if she's playing around there.
So how because you just said I hope to, and before that you said you were pretty confident. How I'm not curious about how confident you are. What I'm more curious about is how much does this matter to you?
I mean, enough for me to give intent to it. I cast a little spell. I had some flash paper left over from a solstice observance, and I put my intent on that paper, and I lit it and let go of it in that arch, and that's sort of the hedge wizardry that I play with um, because why not? I read this book called The Holographic Universe.
I love that book.
It's by Michael Talbot, I believe. And it just blows your mind every few pages. Like, you have to put it down and go, whoa. But one thing that basically, the takeaway of the whole book is that human intent can change outcomes in the physical world. Usually only religious zealots can whip it up that strong, but belief can change outcomes.
Belief can change outcomes. I love that. I read that book and it was so profound. It went right over my head when I was a teenager, and then I reread it in my 20s and it went right over my head, and then I reread it in my 30s and it didn't go right over my head. But it's utterly profound. Yeah.
The most interesting part of that book, though, the one that brings me comfort, is the part about past life regressionists regressing people to the space in between lives, and that you are instrumental in choosing what your obstacles are in the next life, because you know what your permanent soul knows, which is everything, and you know what you have to experience or apprehend. So those are the things that you put in your own way in your next life to develop your soul, to see the things that you're supposed to see through that reward, through that suffering, through that whatever that lifetime is permeated by.
When did you adopt this philosophy? How old were you?
Well, I read the book probably in my late 20s, and it just hung with me, and I didn't actively imply it until all these horrible things started happening to me, medically, situationally. I'm like, I set this up for some reason. Maybe I had taken too many pleasure cruises in lives beforehand, and now I had to get some of the math done.
I see why our mutual contact set us up to talk. We're very similar in a certain way. Yeah, I'm profoundly with you. I find it not ironic. It's the opposite of ironic that most people wait until some really heavy shit happens to start seeking God, spirit, truth, whatever the hell you want to call it. And yet, so many of us read these books in our 20s because that's the period where you want to explore. So it's funny to me.
We're searching, right? Well, the books that hit me in my early 20s that formed like the first time I had sort of religious type of epiphanies about, or vibrational understanding of, was the works of Carlos Castaneda, and primarily the practice of impeccability. The way that you comport yourself through life is that you seek to understand as much as you can, and you act on that as true to your nature, and you own your mistakes, and you attempt to change if you respect yourself and or that person that you wronged. So that, the rest of it was really cool and hard to digest without several trips through, but that was the main takeaway from that, that really I strived for impeccability. And that was better than what any other religion was offering it.
Yeah, and I'll say amen to that in a somewhat ironic way, because it's very true. Yeah, and I think God, I hope I say his name right. Miguel Rodriguez, who wrote the Four Agreements. You know, he says be impeccable with your word. A lot of people cite that, and yeah, and that's for me like. There's four agreements in that book, and three of them to me are pretty ridiculously easy. That one is, it's, wow. By the grace of God, may I someday pass that test. But I'm actually curious because I do say in the opening line, I say how our views on death affect the way we live our life. You've covered that pretty well, so now I'm actually going to go next level, and I'm curious. You at one point, everyone but six people deserved to die, and now only six people perhaps deserve to die. Tongue in cheek, I'm asking, like, why are you the arbiter of what is deserving and not deserving punishment? Like, where did you get that? We all have that. I mean, that's why I said tongue in cheek. But like, how for you did that happen?
I have come to understand it better, and that number has fluctuated certainly, in the last 5 years or so. But um, ultimately, it was people who endeavor and revel in spreading needless suffering. Needless suffering is my least favorite thing. Existence is tough enough. Uh, to make it worse for other human beings for gain, sport, whatever reason that they do, that sucks. We don't need that. Honestly, I don't think we need rapists in our society. Sorry, you have to go. This is not what we're trying to do. If we have to explain this to you, we can't help you. Goodbye. Um, you know, Not just like people who don't like this band I like, just some actual thought out stuff. But they are. And there was a conversation at a fire pit in Portland one time back in the magical days of Portland, where this rapper from Los Angeles was like, we were there was great conversations around that fire pit. If you could have brought a mic there, you could have done a weekly podcast off of it. But someone had brought up, you know, in a discussion of, what is, and therefore, the whole "thou shalt not judge." Like, we judge child molesters, but they exist. And I was like, ow, you just hurt my brain. But like, wasps exist, sharks exist, lions exist, like, nightmares exist. But I don't advocate that child molesters are good at all, but they do exist. And from a religious point of view, then so does heroin, so do homosexuals, so does, all those things that you fight against, they're there. Anyway.
I understand the trepidation when you talk about these heavy issues, and especially on a podcast with someone, A, you don't know, and B, it's going to be on the internet. So let me just reassure you that when you say, like, people don't accept this, you're talking about literally, like, the status quo in our country for hundreds of years has been, it's not okay to be this, it's not okay to be that, it's not okay, and yet these things exist. And so you're calling out the most profound thought possible, which is, if these things are not supposed to exist, why do they exist in every culture, in every society, in every epoch? And what can we do, and how can we handle that? And so I'm not going to force you to answer that question, but you did a damn good job, in my opinion, of addressing how it comes up. What it really is eating at me is that you grew up in Michigan, and then you lived in Idaho, and then you moved to Portland. And I've lived in Portland, and I've traveled to all 50 states, and I'm definitely familiar with the subcultures of Michigan outside Detroit and also Idaho. And they're rough. They're very much what we're talking about. Like, they're the eye in the pie of America. And so I'm assuming you witnessed a lot of just like normal 1960s, 70s, and 80s bullying, which again, I'm not apologizing for or saying is okay, but it's normal. Like I grew up with that too, and it's hideous. So I'm curious, were you, and this is personal, but I think it matters for our audience, were you the subject of bullying? Were you watching bullies, or were you ever a bully, or is it all three?
Well, from the ages 0 till 10, my bully was my dad. So I lived with bullying at home, real bullying from a giant bully who could really hit you harder than any kid could. So I didn't have bullies really as a, you know, there was this one kid who tried to bully me and I sort of threw him down a hole and then he wanted to be my best friend. making making that story really short. But yeah, no, I had the ultimate bully, which was dad. So
And I'm very sorry to hear that. And I'm still glad I asked the question because I think, and like I said, it's for our audience. It's not for me or for you. It's because people need to know how much this shit affects people. And because you sound like a person who wants people to live a life without needless suffering. And that to me is the greatest quality any human can have because that's kind of the secret to everything. And yet you're being punished physically, whether you want to call it that or not. It appears that way since, as you said, normal people get physical punishment for living their life in their 75 to 80 range, if even then. You're having it in your late 40s. So my heart goes out to you. I have nothing but compassion for you, and I also am thankful that you're talking about all this.
well, I've always wanted to have a podcast with a friend of mine because we would freestyle conversation for 6 hours or so for entertainment, just sitting around. Um, and we were good at it, and we always wondered, like, do we have bullet points? Are we scripted, or we just do it organically? So I'm really appreciative to be a part of this because it's, it's been on my loose bucket list.
Well, we are no Make-A-Wish foundation or anything, but I am very happy to help you out. But I always give our guests a chance to kind of have the floor. So please get your message out as clearly or unclearly as you want to. But what would you like to say to the masses? I mean, we got people who listen to this. They don't know you. They're going to hear you.
I'd like to say to everyone that death is a gift that God gives each one of his children. And sometimes, due to circumstances, we have to open them early, and that's rude, and that hurts the people around us. But it's a gift, and you'll get yours too, so try not to be jealous.
Okay, holy that was profound. That was, my dog just got diagnosed with a somewhat fatal life-ending thing, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it, and that is the only thing that has provided me comfort in the last 5 days, because he's opening his gift early, and I'm fucking mad at him for it, which is inappropriate.
Yeah, but it isn't early unless that was self-harm, right? That was his span, and you got to love him, and you got to spend that time with him, and that is such a gift. And what got me through Penelope's murder and burial and my relocation is gratitude, active gratitude for everything you're still grateful for, even though dot dot dot. You're grateful for every second you got with him. You're grateful for every time he gave you that adoring gaze. You're grateful for, every game of fetch. You're grateful for it still. That's not ruined. It's still beautiful and it still happened.
I am moved, and I want to thank you. We always say you've helped us put another nail in the coffin. I feel like you might have helped us put two in on this episode. And I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your gift of articulation. And so with that said, everyone, you have been listening to another episode of Coffin Talk Interviews with the Living. My name is Mike Oppenheim. Please, if you can, subscribe to the podcast and maybe share it with a friend. And we will see you soon. When I walk into you, when I see that you see me, and I see you hear this tune, and I feel